when you talk about domination, we can be talking about these hugely destructive kind of systemic issues. But then you also go, as you kind of say, down to the minutiae of holding yourself and all of us accountable for our own psychology of domination, of living in separation. And yeah, you even say, as you pointed out there, that even if you're saying you're better than someone, you're engaged psychologically in some kind of separation where you're comparing, right? And then if you say you're inferior to them, there's still separation and a feeling of not belonging. But even if you say you're equal to, it's still some kind of comparison.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's such a powerful teaching. This teaching on mana is called in Pali. And that lesser than is really important too, because I talk at one point about stereotype threat and what I call semiotic vigilance, these ways that people of color, women, marginalized folks can move through spaces and constantly underestimate ourselves to the point where it affects our capacities and performance. And so, just the fact of being the only person of color in a room will affect our capacities, will diminish our capacities if we kind of are not aware of the ways that we buy into the narratives of the culture. So it's not just us telling us that we're lesser than or, greater than, but it's the whole setup of society that is based on these structures of white supremacy and colonialism and patriarchy that create these systems of measuring, like unconsciously within our own minds. So then, we have the whole kind of gamut of all the unconscious biases, and so much of this is below the level of conscious thought or our rational capacities. It's just going on all the time, just kind of automatically.
Yeah, you just reminded me of a study where I think it was they did it with different groups of people, but they would get men and women to take a test, and they would tell one group beforehand, I'd like to tell the women, oh, women tend to do worse on this test, and then lo and behold, they do much worse than they would do otherwise. So you can really see these small signals that are very real have these kind of real effects when they get kind of internalized, right, in people. And this kind of signaling is happening all the time. And I guess it's maybe one of the core aspects of domination and separation in society, right? This kind of signaling to certain groups that they don't belong to the mainstream.
Yeah, exactly. And so, issues of representation and modeling seem sort of surface or not important, but they're so intimately important because they're constantly programming our unconscious conditioning.
Right. And you mentioned this semiotic vigilance, and you compare it to this phrase code switching, and to kind of describe how is code switching where I'll let you explain the difference between the two.
Yeah, code switching is often used to describe when people are fluent in different literal languages or kind of cultural languages, different communities, and that they're able to kind of just fluidly move through these spaces. So I describe someone who can kind of move through 3 different languages with a lot of ease, with other people who also speak all 3 languages fluently. But it's often used to describe people of color and Black folks in this country who kind of code switch between different communities, because I use this metaphor of the margin to center. We often talk about marginalized people. And so, people with less access to resources and power on the margins, people with more access in the center. And the thing about the margins is that most people who are on the margins who have any connection to the dominant culture kind of move in and out. And so we become much more fluent in different spaces because we move in and out from, our kind of neighborhoods that maybe are ethnically distinct, or our communities that are ethnically distinct, and then into the marketplace, or into even literally the center of a city where the seat of power is. So yeah, the code switching is when we're really comfortable with that fact. But I describe my experience of it as semiotic vigilance, where moving between these spaces had me questioning my identity, questioning, whether I really belonged in one space or another, and always sort of keeping guard about how I was speaking, when I was speaking, who I'm speaking to. And I can imagine this is very powerful in the UK, just with the kind of, I don't even know that much, but like accents are so powerful, right? And so I know a few folks who kind of, it's not like they're even hiding, but their accent changes depending on who they're talking to. Like British people I know whose accent changes. And so it becomes kind of like a code switching, but I'm sure sometimes it comes with this like semiotic vigilance of like, okay, I need to show up in a particular way in this space. Is that true? Or am I
Yeah,
just
no,
imagining that?
absolutely. No, I mean, all the stereotypes are true of UK being incredibly, kind of class based and very judgmental. And I think the semiotic vigilance is something that, not to minimize the way in which it is magnified in marginalized groups, but I feel like it's something that's just in the British psyche in general, where there's a constant like checking of are you, being perceived the right way? Are you, there's historically been such an emphasis on kind of manners and so much is decoded as soon as you enter a room. I remember going to university and there's just constant, and I was doing it as well, trying to file people according to class and based on, we have these very stratified school systems. And so, yeah, it resonated with me, especially.